Well, thank you for coming and sorry to keep you waiting. Can I just get a sense of who actually has seen, who came to watch the show? Okay. Oh, great, yes, because you guys recorded this. Hi, my name is Chen. I am the director. I'm one of the participants of the Directors Lab. And this talk is supposed to be about MEDEA. It's a post production sharing. So I'm just to keep it very open. So I have some slides planned to tell you about the process. But because I suppose only 3 of you have watched the show, I'm not really quite sure what you're interested to hear, and I'm very happy to modify that based on what you would like to talk about and you like to hear. So, yeah. So MEDEA is the end of an 18-month process, and let me just stop this. I really should have used this mic, yes, you're right, because I'm competing with Timber right now. So, as you can see here, these are the 4 actors that played MEDEA. And for me, the journey began 18 months ago, or maybe more than that. I can't really remember, but I remember starting my journey around June officially. And part of the Directors Lab program enabled us to go overseas to meet directors who were interested in who we wanted to learn from. And I went to meet Barbara from Bangkok, this guy here, and Zuni Ecosahadran's Danny Yong. Apparently he takes selfies a lot better than I do. Yeah, right. And so Tuan Pradik Prasatong is one of the key players in Bangkok theatre. He is one of the directors who is also running the Bangkok Theatre Festival, and he also was one of the driving forces behind Makapom Theatre. Makapom Theatre is a grassroots theatre organization that works a lot with the different theatre makers to work with for social change. And then he started his own company called Anata Theatre Troupe, which he was kind of, after he's done 20 or so years of social-driven theatre, he decided to do theatre that was beautiful. These are his words. And so, as much as there's meaning behind the stuff that he's doing, he's also moving into a new phase of his artistic journey, where he's doing works that he feels is more aesthetically driven rather than social driven. Danny Yong, if you're familiar with his works, I call him kind of the Robert Wilson of Asia. He's highly conceptual, kind of boring to watch sometimes, but extremely visually arresting, and the works that he produces as far as writing about his works and the kind of the discourse that he has with his works is very interesting and very rich. So he's really very, very kind of a postmodern director who doesn't deal with naturalism as it is. So I chose 2 extremely different directors simply because I was interested in both of them and in the cities in which they worked in. Why do they do theatre? Bangkok has very little arts funding. Compared to them, I think Singapore is extremely rich when it comes to arts funding. And for Hong Kong, Zuni Ecosahadran was created out of a political movement from the 1990s and leading up to the 1997 split or remerger with China. So that was my basis of going to them, because what I wanted to explore, and I'm an actor. My first entry point into theatre was as an actor, and I kept asking myself, why am I doing this? For what? Why am I spending so much of my life, so much of my time, so much of my heart to a craft that sometimes does not always return, monetarily, and sometimes doesn't return passion. There are days where you end up taking work that isn't really as meaningful to you simply because you've got to eat, right? So why am I doing this? Why does Singapore theatre matter? That was the basis of my discourse when I first joined the Substation Directors Lab. And why does theatre matter in these 2 countries? And I chose Bangkok and Hong Kong because they're very similar to Singapore in many different ways. Extremely urbanized. Bangkok has a stronger traditional arts tradition for art arts, traditional arts, Thai dance is a very strong, it still runs, it's a very strong heartbeat that runs throughout the contemporary theatre scene as well. Everyone I met when I went to Bangkok has had some training in traditional arts. And Hong Kong is a very urban-driven financial hub where does culture come into play? How is culture created in a place where finance and where the finance is wow, right? Finance is a commodity, and it's people are stacked onto each other, and it's really driven by a money market. So I saw these similarities between Singapore, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Bangkok. Yeah. So my journey for MEDEA, actually, one of the pit stops I made was at the LaSalle SIA theatre space. This was the beautiful stage that never came to be. I had meant to stage MEDEA. Oh, so let me backtrack a bit. So when I first joined the program, well, I really didn't have what I wanted to stage in mind. It was more of the process driven. And I knew very quickly that I wasn't a writer. I wasn't here to learn writing. I was a new director, and I'm not really here to write a new piece. So I chose MEDEA because it was a strong story, but didn't have the strong point of view that a living playwright would have. So it allowed me to explore things within the Substation Director's Lab process, and also allowed me to learn directing without having to account for a poor script. So I chose MEDEA. And I wanted to put it within a space where it allowed me to flip the audience so that the audience would sit on stage facing where an actor would face when they're on stage. And to answer the larger question of where is the Singapore actor? Why do we do theatre? What is the experience of the actor? So these were the larger questions that I was asking, but with a rather straightforward staging of MEDEA. So financial constraints as the way it is, and venues now are really expensive in Singapore to make theatre. So independent work is going to be very difficult, and to create new works, it's extremely difficult for places. Simply because a huge amount of the budget would be devoted to just renting a shell. This doesn't address a lot of the manpower things that we need to do in order to have the space. And even though it was the theatre, a lot of it was comparable to a black box cost. So with the producers, we decided to move it to the Substation Director's Substation Theatre, which was not a perfect space, I will admit that, simply because we have this going on, and we had to account for a lot of the extraneous things. And it also forced me to change conceptually what I wanted to do. It was, previously I had just wanted to do a straightforward staging of MEDEA without any change in the script, maybe some cuts here and there. But when I moved into this space, I thought that how can I put such a big story into such an intimate space? That was a very big question, and I struggled with it for the 24 hours I had to make a decision. Self-imposed 24 hours to make a decision, because I was 2 weeks to rehearsal. And so I decided that it was, let's deconstruct the story of MEDEA. That was supposed to be kind of phase 3 of this process. I was doing straightforward staging, and then later on maybe I would deconstruct the story a bit. So I said, okay, fine, let's just deconstruct it, because in this space it's very clear that it's not a Greek theatre. There's the big epic scale that I wanted to use for MEDEA. I can't do it here. So I decided to see if I can pull stories out from the stories of MEDEA, from the personal stories of the actors inspired from MEDEA. It's just to see where it went. It really was a, oh gosh, I have 2 weeks before rehearsal starts. My game plan, I have to throw it out the window. I have actors coming in within I have actors coming in. I have to put a show within 4 weeks. I've committed to this. How do I put this together? So it really was starting with a collaborative effort. And so what came out of it, and if you saw this portion where Farah, the actress, broke out of the story of MEDEA into telling a story about her mother, the 4 actors did it at different points. And so we wove in and out of a rather
we broke in between the scenes. We staged certain parts of Medea, and out of those scenes where the stories mattered, we pulled them out. So Farah talked about her mother, and it suddenly became a story about parenting, about death, about the way parents saw the actors. So yeah. So that was what the structure was for Medea. And I began with the idea of using Bharatanatyam, which was Indian dance, and I'll talk about it a bit later. Well, let me just finish this part of the presentation. So we started on August 28th at the Pandemonium Studio to rehearse. It was a beautiful space that allowed us to kind of create without you can't do Medea in a small space. You can't. you cannot kill 2 children and burn a princess and a king in a small space. So the studio was wonderful, and it gave us the opportunity to work comfortably. So we spent four weeks with the rehearsal process. The first 2 weeks was spent excavating stories and really to do work that I would have liked it to come a bit earlier. Because we had an 18-month process, it would be nice to have been a chance to improv these stories and to excavate these stories and then send it off to the writer to write about. And last year I went to La Mama, which is a New York-based theater company that holds a retreat at La Mama in Italy every year. And NAC sends a grant, so if you are an actor, if you're a director, if you'd like to go apply for that, because it's great. It's full expense paid. And that year, this gentleman called Paul Binitz, who's supposed an academic but a practitioner as well. He's known for his method called real-time acting. So the whole basis of it is that the actor is a storyteller. So the actor is never fully the character. So in naturalism, the actor will approach the character as if he becomes the character. It's a very method way of acting, right? So you will live, how would that particular character breathe, how would that particular character eat, things like that. Well, on the flip side, when it comes down to Brecht's work, right? It's like there's alienation. There's absolutely no suspension of disbelief, where it's always an intellectual question that is being asked. So there is no character. So Paul Binitz, coming out from the 1960s, and he kind of developed this during the 70s and 80s, was coming at a time where they're starting to ask, like, okay, Brechtian work is great, but so what? What if we don't feel anything? What's the point? So he wanted to see if there's a way to marry. This is my understanding of where it came out from. Naturalism and Brechtian work. How does Brechtian work? How can it work in a setting where we can still understand the story, but still think about the larger issues that we're trying to put forward? So the actor here that never ever becomes a character, but he has the freedom to come in and out of his character to be the storyteller. So one of the methods of him working is that he asks the actor to retell the story. So we start with telling a personal story. So I asked the actors to say, okay, can you tell me a personal story about your mother? And so they would tell it from, they would just simply tell it. You have 3 minutes, talk. It's a story. We do it again, we come back and we say, okay, tell the same story again. So they retell it again. And now, tell it from the third person perspective. So now you remove yourself from your personal story, and then you're only allowed to use he, she, they. So now you're becoming the narrator. So in that sense, distancing yourself from the personal story that is from you, how do you still tell the story that is still connected? And then from there, we found distance in the story, and then we're able to make certain choices that otherwise, if it's your personal story, you may have too much personal investment in. And also at the later part of this workshop period, we got each of the actors to tell, because by now we had heard the same story 3 or 4 times, we got each of the actors to retell each other's story. Using the full tools of theatre, meaning that you can use song, you can use movement, you use your body, you use text. So it really becomes a storytelling session. So that's how we excavated the stories, and then we sent it off with a writer that I asked on board 1 week before we started. It was rather unfair to ask a writer to write anything within 2 weeks because we needed to rehearse a show.
The deadline I gave him was, I'm sorry, but if we don't have anything by 2 weeks, we have to figure something out. And so it was just an impossible deadline. It was hope. So what we agreed on was for the actors, and the actors together agreed that let's keep each moment real. Every time we are supposed to burst out of their personal story, they have the freedom to tell the same story, but with no script. So only the MEDEA parts were scripted, and only the points where the cues are supposed to come in is where it's scripted. But otherwise, whenever they break into their personal story, they are free to tell it, and based on who's in the audience and all.
Yeah, so that was how that portion was built. And the larger story of, because one of the first few collaborators I talked to was a Bharatanatyam dancer. I was interested in more of working with people rather than fitting things into place. But for the story of MEDEA, when I was looking at it as a traditional Greek show, there are moments of spectacle, right, where the chorus comes and sing a song, and I needed that element. And I asked myself, okay, well, if Danny Yong has Chinese opera, if Dwapra de Prasatong has Thai dance, what is my cultural language? If I'm asking this question of why does Singapore theatre matter? So I looked at my own heritage and I was like, okay, I'm Teochew technically, but I'm third generation Teochew. I don't speak the word anymore. I don't know anything about Teochew opera. So why bother trying to find that root based on on the concept of being Chinese? So I really looked at the whole gamut of what Singapore, postmodern Singapore artists could look at, and I found Bharatanatyam. And great that this lady Ruby was also in her early 20s, was exploring Bharatanatyam and she's gone off to India to study, and she's at a point where she wants to explore boundaries. So I got her in, and she was the movement coach for that. So a big part of what you will see, or what you have seen in the choreography, was Bharatanatyam dance. It was also a way for me to train the actors, and this also comes a bit from William Teo's work, because when he was working, he used a lot of traditional elements as well. Is this of interest to anyone? Okay, so I'm just gonna keep talking, and I'm very quickly gonna open it up to questions. So feel free to yeah. So as you can see, the collaboration is it would have been impossible without these people here, and the actors, as you can see, are in the white or cream, and then this is Ben, who is a composer who's now based in Beijing. What did I do? Now based in Beijing, and he's interesting because he was actually the first person I spoke to. He works a lot with traditional Chinese instruments, but at the same time his composing language is extremely eclectic, and he also writes very well for film. So when we were having many discussions, we're like, okay, where are we now? We're both in our 30s. And okay, well, this is where we need to start showing some kind of worth, right? No more are we the learners, no more are we the people in training. Now we have to start taking over. We need to start showing that we can stand on our 2 feet. But what does that mean? How do we, and a lot of our predecessors are still working, living, and doing very well. So while there's only limited amount of spaces and jobs and opportunities available for us, simply because we're at a stage where the previous generation is not ready to retire, and definitely should not retire. And while we are coming up, and we're like, all right, well, okay, now there's a whole wave of youngsters coming up who are the fresh new voices, fresh new faces, and everyone wants to try them. But now, all right, so how about us? Now that is where what opportunities that should be there for us are not there because it's currently occupied, and opportunities that we've been taking is starting to be occupied. So, what now? so we began asking all these questions about, all right, so what does it mean to be Singaporean then? What does it mean to be Singaporean artists? Does it mean that we speak Singlish? Does it mean that we only are Chinese, Malay, Indian? Does it mean that we are only like, I don't know, whatever SG50 is throwing at us now? You know, does it mean that we're only political? No. I mean, I like, honestly, I'm postmodern. I grew up on diet of Sesame Street. I grew up on diet of like Friends. I grew up on, you know, I spent 9 years of my life in America, and there's a huge population of Singaporeans who've done that now. And does that mean we're less Singaporean? I don't think so. I mean, I'm Chinese, but I eat like prata every morning. Does it mean I'm less Chinese? No. Does it mean I'm Singaporean? Maybe. I don't know. So those are the questions I was asking. Those are the questions we're asking ourselves. So he was going to Beijing to further his studies, and he was asking, okay, so what does it mean to be a composer from Singapore? Does it mean anything? So we were just asking all these questions, and it was a very nice place to start. I don't know if we managed to push the boundaries that we wanted to within this process itself, because he was in Beijing, and a lot of it, I suppose, could have been explored more if he was here in the space. But you know, he was a wonderful collaborator to work with, and Skype was our friend. But it's also the beginning of collaboration, I think, for the two of us, and it's nice when two artists from completely different disciplines. He's a musician. He's done a lot of classical Chinese music. He's done a lot of classical composing, and here I am as an actor learning directing. And it's nice when two artists, you know, connect and can work together. So I appreciate that. And a big part of the process also comes from William Teo's work. And from what I understand, because I never got the chance to work with him, but I got the chance to work with two people who have significant influences on myself as an actor, Christina Sargent and Jeremiah Choi. They worked intensively with him. And the way that they build ensemble, the way they approach who comes into the fold was very important to the process. So it was lovely to have these three RP students with us at every point, because it was a new process for them, and it was a difficult process for them to deal with a director who was learning as well, I think, because that meant that I didn't know how to solve some of the problems, and which meant that I got frustrated. But ultimately, I think this picture for me represents the kind of theatre that I'm interested in, where people is the center of it, where process and change, whether it is an artistic change, whether it is a social change or whatever, is the heart of why we do what we do. So I do not have an answer to why Singapore theatre matters, like what the hell was I thinking, right? But I have questions that I would like to continue asking. And it's like, how can theatre continue to be relevant? How can theatre, and I feel like it comes from where we are as collaborators, where we are as artists, and with the contact that we make with each other, and the contact that we make with the audience that they come in. That's the relationship, that's the most important thing. And change happens through that process more than anything else. So that's my next hypothesis. I think that's all the slides I prepared. Yeah, so that's it I have prepared. If you'd like to ask me questions or go and take a break while we wait for Kaya's piece to start, by all means. So, any questions?
I apologize because I didn't see the piece.
It's okay. It should be available. I think this will be available on the Substation Directors Lab website, yes.
But would you like to talk a little bit more about how you incorporated the Bharatanatyam?
Well, you mean as in the staging itself or through the process?
Whichever.
Okay. Well, I started out wanting to use it as a means to tell the epic side of the Greek story, right? To find ways to within a specific cultural language, how do I bring out the story of MEDEA more? And eventually it was very clear that the amount of work that a Bharatanatyam dancer would put into to the training is not going to be done within the 18 months that we are together. And I knew that, but I was just hoping that let's see how far we can go. And after the first, we had one showing before the final thing, where we had a bit of a workshop, and we were just, with the actors, just exploring the body of Bharatanatyam. That was for an earlier draft, which was supposed to go to the Sal SI Theatre. So when it came back into this space, it offered me the opportunity to focus on Ruby here. Ruby. So for me, the larger story of MEDEA is about the individual actors of the individual journeys of these 4 actors. And Ruby's story then became about Bharatanatyam, and that became her craft, her moment of showing. So we also began each show with the actors training in Bharatanatyam. So the directive to them was that, okay, for every time we begin a run, you will do Bharatanatyam for 20 minutes. So and Ruby's task was to train. Because one of the questions she was asking, so now it's a traditional art, it's such a codified method of practice. How do you keep it living? So I was like, okay, let's explore this. The 3 actors have no idea what Bharatanatyam is. How do you pass on culture? How do you create culture? This is also one of the larger answers that I found is, because Singapore theatre matters because we create culture. So, and then the moments of spectacle come out, but at the end of the show, the actors return to training. So they go back to Bharatanatyam to train. So it's almost as if the audience has walked into a space where the actors are inhabiting. And some of this, because the story of MEDEA was such a heavy story, the personal stories were rather dramatically heavy as well. Talks about how one of the actors' father called her a prostitute, another one talked about the death of his grandfather, seeing his mother. So these are really heavy things. So out of this oh, woe is me kind of thing, we didn't want to go there. We said, okay, well, at the end of everything, life is hard. We faced betrayal, but we continue doing what we're doing. We train, we perform. So that's where Bharatanatyam came in. It became a moment of contact between a practicer, someone who's been practicing Bharatanatyam for a while, with someone with 3 contemporary Singaporean actors from a cross section of what I feel Singapore theatre is now these days. Yeah.
So did you feel that it informed their bodies in any way in the performance?
I have to say objectively not, but except during the dance moments. I think because we didn't know enough about it. We hadn't gotten enough about it, and it was only in the last, after we had run once and we had like maybe an extra day, we're like, okay, we run this again, we're gonna kill ourselves. So we began exploring the body and text a bit more purposefully. So if we had begun that earlier, I think, we might have found something. And we did find stuff in that just 2 hours of us working. But it would have destabilized where we were in the show to try to incorporate it. But that being said, the actors were also challenged to say, okay, out of this, when you're learning Bharatanatyam, how does it inform, and how can it inform the way you hold yourselves? Yeah. So maybe that's next phase. Yes, Kaya. So this is kind of where you will be sitting, if you look at it, right? The actors will be playing all around it. So they're using it as a found space. So meaning that instead of building a set, they're using the Sao space, would have liked to use it as a found space. Meaning that we're just going to light it as it is. So we're going to keep it in the root that this is theatre space. They could move up. They could have moved up there. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, that's a different show. Yeah. Well, Kaya's going to talk after me. So I'm also curious about okay, if there's any other questions. Yes. Please. This is a dialogue now, so.
So, whose translation did you use of the...
Oh, this is where I need to pull it up. I'm so sorry, my names are horrible, but I used the Cambridge translation.
Yeah.
I used the Cambridge translation. Do we remember what the name is? But why do you ask that question actually, maybe?
I'm just really interested in translations, because my next question is, did you find that the language sat comfortably in their mouths?
Hold on, let me find it here somewhere. Well, okay, yes, because Singaporean actors are very trained these days. And we're also forced to use a language that is not really in our bodies. I mean, we don't grow up speaking heightened British English. We grow up speaking Singlish. We are taught to speak formal English. And then we get bombarded by American, Australian, and all sorts of things that come from media. And then when we finally step on stage, we're expected to perform in a specific language. So a lot, like all my actors, except for the exception of Ruby, simply because she's a dancer first and foremost, have had some training in that kind of heightened text. Jo just did Shakespeare earlier that year. Farah is Farah. Her presence will just blast through anything, and she's good with words as well. And Chad has a training with Fitzmaurice, the voice work. And what I found more challenging was not necessarily the biting of the words, the articulation of the words, because I think if you're working in Singapore theatre, most generally you would have the capacity for it. I think what was more difficult, and I think it's not necessarily unique to Singapore, is how do you fit such carnal words? How do you fit, and the words are very heightened, the text was heightened. How do you fit such instinctive words into the body where everything is now text? So that was more of the challenge than the actual articulation of it.
I wasn't talking about articulation at all.
Okay.
I was talking about the double D-clutch that you've already done, because you've taken a Greek play, which has been translated by some English.
Yeah.
And then you're working with what I think you rightly described as Singaporean actors, because the spectrum that you had.
Yeah.
And that's what because to my observation, very often the British translations emasculate the original. So I assume that one of the reasons you were looking at the Bharatanatyam was trying to find a more direct, visceral link.
I suppose that also betrays a bit of my own understanding of it then, because when I read it and what I'm exposed to, I suppose, is I suppose the most heightened kind of words that I've worked with would be Shakespeare. And I enjoy reading Greek theatre, but when it comes down to performing Greek theatre, I've never done it before as an actor. And I suppose my frame of mind as a Singaporean practitioner now, to me, that already was very visceral. So I'm sure if we go back to the Greek and we go to other translations, where and actually when I was looking at the different translations, a lot of them, yes, they do emasculate it. They make it so pedantic. They make it so normal. And so of all the different translations I was looking at, there was one or two that had like very face-to-face kind of dialogue. And that to me was like not Greek theatre. And so I chose this one. But Bharatanatyam was an exploration for me as well, in that sense. And there was and the power of it fit very nicely into what I thought I wanted to tell. Yeah. I suppose it's an interesting cross-section of where we are and with the kinds of practitioners there are, I suppose.
I think we often make the mistake of thinking it's from a British culture. because we receive it through that language and those translations.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I mean, what was interesting, like the last show, well, we had like a full house of NAFA Chinese theatre students from China. So I was very curious to know what their response were. And the Chinese teenagers are a lot more connected than we are, you know, on their phones. So some of them were on their phones, one of them was sleeping. And, you know, I mean, the theatre etiquette aside, I mean, it's also what's interesting to them, right? And a couple of them actually came down to join in the Bharatanatyam in the beginning, and luckily we had already told the actors, if anyone wanted to do it, they are free to come down because this is how culture is created, right? So they came down, they did it, and they were obviously theatre students because, you know, they were happy to do it. So I didn't get a chance to talk because they came out of nowhere. Like someone came in the day of and bought like 40 tickets or so, right? Something like that. So that was interesting as well, where we are. You know, Singapore is such a crossroads now, and it's becoming urgent, I suppose, to articulate our identity a bit more, but also, like, what's the point now? We've done it. We've done it. Like the more we try to hold on to what is local, and one of the media things, exercises that we did called local elements in Bharatanatyam. Are we ending? Okay, I'm just talking. Great. Local elements into the staging, and I felt very uncomfortable with that. That dichotomy of what is local and what is foreign disturbed me a bit, especially when it came to this piece. So, but that was just the media, I suppose. Yes, Kaya.
You know, your first work in progress showing with the 4 actors telling them you had totally different actors and they told their individual stories.
Yeah.
So what happened to that? And was it a result of, like, how did it affect you when you got back? Because I was there, and then someone said, like, oh, you are struggling with the writing. Don't struggle with the writing.
Yeah.
So how did that affect you?
Well, it was clear to me. I think when you start out as a new artist, and from an actor where you're being told where to stand, and all you have to do is memorize your lines, you're blocking, whatever, right? But now, when you're starting to have a bit more responsibility in creating, that was painful. That was painful, but I knew that from that process. Just to catch us up, at the first ever thing I did for the Substation Directors Lab was to work with 4 actors to explore their personal stories as well. I was asking where's the point, where's Singapore acting? So I hot seat them, mainly just throw them questions and then they would come up with a monologue. And yeah, I'm not a writer, and I'm not here to learn writing. So that comment for me was basically a confirmation that I cannot, that if I want to work towards writing a new piece, it's a completely different skill set. And I needed to work with, if that's the case, then the approach would be different, and I was not interested in that. So it was definitely not easy. It was not an easy thing. Actually, that was the best comment I've heard. But the harshest comment was not that. Well, this happened after this showing, right? And the harshest comment was, I probably would not have accepted you in the program anyway. Another program. Because I was like, hey, how come there's this other program going? How come you never tell me about it? I would like to continue. Well, I probably wouldn't accept you anyway. And I didn't clarify because at the moment I was like, alright, whatever. but I don't think he meant it like you sucked all the way lah. But I think you just, and I just at that moment it was just one of the harshest things I heard, because that came back to like, okay, so now what? What do I do now? I have to create my own work, and that's clear to me now. I cannot get help. I can create opportunities, but I have to do that, right? That's what I got out of it. Yeah. I'll be interested to hear what your process was. Now, shall we move on? Well, we can keep it informal if you like to ask me questions later. But let's move on. Thank you so much.